Most people who hear pancreatic cancer go silent for a while. They need time. They need space. Rick Houston didn't take either. He got the diagnosis on a Thursday, and by that same evening he had already written the words down and posted them for the world to read. Houston is a name NASCAR fans and historians know well. For years, he's been the guy tracking down the stories nobody else bothered to chase, the details other outlets let slip through the cracks. He does it through the Scene Vault podcast, a show built entirely around preserving NASCAR's past before it disappears. This time, though, the story he posted wasn't about a driver from 1979 or a forgotten short-track legend. It was about himself. The cancer, he said, appears to have already reached his liver. What he wrote next is the part people keep coming back to. He said he wasn't afraid. He said he didn't know what was coming, but he knew who was holding it. That's a man who spent his whole career chasing certainty in old box scores and archived newspapers, suddenly facing something with none of that certainty at all, and choosing peace over panic anyway. He wasn't in physical pain, he said. What kept him up wasn't the disease itself. It was his family and what they'd have to carry alongside him. But even with that weight on him, he made one thing clear. The podcast wasn't going anywhere. He called producing it one of the greatest joys of his professional life and said he had no intention of stepping away from it now. He closed the announcement with 3 words that have since been repeated across NASCAR media all week. Bring it on. To understand why that response landed so hard with people who know him, you have to go back to where Rick Houston actually started. He wasn't chasing a press pass as a kid. He was headed toward a life in ministry. Racing wasn't even part of the plan until 1991, when it pulled him in and never let go. His first real foothold in journalism was small, sports editor at a local paper in Sparta, North Carolina, covering short-track racers most of the country would never hear of. 3 years later, in 1994, the biggest paper in the sport came calling. Winston Cup Scene wasn't just another outlet back then, it was close to required reading in every NASCAR garage in America. Houston climbed his way up to Busch Series editor, spending years on the road, sitting across from drivers who were still unknowns, building trust with people who would go on to become some of the sport's biggest names. Along the way, he wrote 9 books. 3 of them are considered essential reading for anyone who takes NASCAR history seriously. One was the first real deep dive into the story of the Busch Series. Another told the full story of the 1992 Hooters 500, the race where Richard Petty ran his last laps, Jeff Gordon ran his first, and Alan Kulvitsky walked away with a championship almost nobody saw coming. A third traced Dale Earnhardt's decades-long chase after the one race that always seemed to slip out of his hands, the Daytona 500. Beyond the books, Houston tracked down something that might be the only complete physical archive of its kind anywhere, 32 straight years of NASCAR Scene, every single issue, and he digitized the whole thing so it could never be lost. That instinct to preserve things, to make sure nothing important just quietly disappears, runs through basically everything he's ever done. And it goes beyond racing. He wrote a book about the mission controllers behind the Apollo space program, consulted on a documentary about that same era, and ended up as an extra in the Oscar-winning film First Man. At home in North Carolina, he's been married to Jeannie since 1996. She's a district court judge. He's also a deacon at his church, which, in a strange full-circle way, connects right back to that path toward ministry he was on before racing rerouted his whole life. Here's what makes the timing of this diagnosis even harder to sit with. In 2018, Houston co-founded the Scene Vault podcast with a man named Steve Waid, his old boss, and eventually one of the closest friends he had. Waid had put in 28 years at NASCAR Scene, working his way up to editor-in-chief, and along the way he mentored a generation of NASCAR writers, including names like Bob Pockrass and Jeff Gluck. In 2018, he was honored with the Squier-Hall Award for Excellence in NASCAR Media, one of the highest honors a NASCAR journalist can receive. Steve Waid died on June 15, 2026. He was 77 years old. Rick Houston was there with him in the room when it happened. In one of his final moments with his old friend and mentor, Houston reminded him how far the two of them had come all the way back to 1990, when Waid had turned him away right at the front door of the Scene office and hadn't even let him inside. From getting turned away at the door to nearly 30 years working side by side. When Houston made the announcement of Waid's passing, he did it in 3 words. It is finished. Just weeks after burying his friend and creative partner, Houston got a diagnosis of his own. And instead of retreating from the microphone that had defined so much of his adult life, he picked it back up. He's still hosting. He's still producing. He's still telling other people's stories the same way he has for over 3 decades, even while carrying one of the hardest chapters of his own. There's something almost poetic about a man who spent his career making sure other people's legacies didn't get lost to time, now writing his own chapter in real time, in public, without flinching. He didn't wait for the disease to define the narrative. He got ahead of it the same day. He heard the news on the same platform where he spent years honoring everyone else's history. Rick Houston isn't asking for sympathy, and he isn't hiding from what's ahead. He said it himself, plain and simple. Not scared, not alone, not stopping. Just 3 words to close it out. The same defiant tone that's carried him from a small-town sports desk in North Carolina all the way to becoming one of the most trusted voices in NASCAR history. Bring it on.